Welcome to the Chaos and Light podcast. I am your host, Angela Levesque, and on today's program, we have Jeanne Michele, or she likes to be called Jeannie. She thought it was pretty cool that I could say her name correctly in French, so she said I could call her that. We have just a wonderful conversation about Mary Magdalene and her pilgrimage to visiting some of the ancient sites in Europe that are associated with her, and just about the messages of the rise of the divine feminine and what that really looks like as we come into a true partnership. If you haven't checked out chaosandlight.com, I suggest you do. And if you're feeling kind of stuck in a transition, feel free to check out my offerings page there as well. We will be right back after this ridiculously short break. Are you enjoying this podcast and want to help this lady out? Well, share it with friends, or even better, leave a review on iTunes. We'd love to hear from you. Now back to the show. I'm here today with Dr. Jeanne Michele, also known as Jeannie. She is many things, part teacher, part modern day philosopher, part change agent, part coach. She is passionate about helping people create extraordinary relationships and lives. She designs and delivers personalized programs to men, women, and couples to help them create lives, relationships, and business partnerships that thrive. So I'm excited to welcome Dr. Jeanne Michele to the Chaos and Light podcast. How are you?
I am great, Angela, and I'm so happy to be here. I've been looking forward to our conversation today and opening to what shows up for us both as we just begin to dive in.
So it's interesting. I have been contacted by a lot of people who are very interested in Mary Magdalene, and people who are including her in her rituals, people who are saying they've had, some connection experiences with her. And so she's just showing up big. And when I got your email and I knew that this is something that has been of interest to you, I just wanted to have you on and have you share your experiences with her and your pilgrimage to go visit some of her sacred sites. So I'd love to talk about all of that today. So let's start at the beginning. Tell us your story about connecting with Mary Magdalene and how your interests with her began.
Okay, I love to tell this story, and I am so happy she ends up, and I'll tell my story in a second, she ends up popping up in the world as I did my research in times where women are really looking to find their voice and make a difference in the world. And historically, when I went back to study her, she always reemerges during these times. And I think right now is a very powerful time. And I am hoping that her resurrection and reemergence right now is one that stays. She would emerge and then something would shove her back down. So I've seen her go like this over the past, 2 centuries. I should say 2000 years, sorry. So my journey is when I was a young girl, I grew up Catholic, and in Catholicism, you have this ritual right before Easter called the Stations of the Cross. And you go around to each of these images and, you say a little bit of a prayer. And for me, when I sat there, there's this one image and it's called Veronica Wipes the Face of Jesus. So it's where all these women come forward with a lot of compassion. They step out in front of these male guards who are, staunch and pushing everyone away. And this one woman wiped his face with great love and compassion. And, the mythology or the story is that his image then stayed on the cloth. So when we were at that station, I just closed my eyes. And I felt this strong connection with Mary Magdalene. It's like she showed up, and not that I had this vision, but just this impression of her. And this immense amount of love washed over me. And in that moment, I knew that she and Jesus had this very special connection that was very different than what I had been taught in the days when I was little. And still a lot of people believe this now. She was the prostitute that Jesus saved from being stoned, which is not true. But I knew that wasn't true. And the thing is, I didn't have anyone to share it with because I knew if I came forward with that story, that people would look at me like I was crazy because that wasn't, the story of the time. So fast forward years later, I am in a program in clinical psychology to get my doctorate. And there's this point in time where you have to decide what you're going to write about, what you're going to do your own research on. And, people choose things like attachment disorder and, depression and anxiety. And for me, I heard this voice that said, tell my story. And I'm like, what? And it was Mary Magdalene again. And she said, tell my story. And I'm like, oh my gosh, who, me? I don't know how to do that. And, I pulled back a little bit, kind of afraid to even, suggest that as a dissertation topic. But I went to a Jungian school, which is very into archetypes and mythology. So she was relentless and she wouldn't leave me alone. And so I decided to propose that as my dissertation topic. And I entitled it Finding Her Voice, looking at the way Christianity has suppressed women's voices and how the story of Mary Magdalene represented women coming back into their own sense of self. It was an amazing journey. I went in and did research, pre-Christian history research, because I wanted to know what went on before this. And what I found when I looked at Egyptian, Greek, Roman, and even Judaic history is that before the patriarchal religions took hold, the women were the ones that met in circle and they were in charge of the spirituality. A little bit different ways in each one of the groupings. And there was this real connection with the sacred feminine. And then as patriarchy took over, that was pushed aside. A lot of women who were very spiritual were burned as witches in Europe and then in the US. And there was this kind of pushback against that more natural way of getting in touch with spirituality and who we are as women and the sacred feminine. And throughout the history, as I said, Mary Magdalene would show up, saints would be in touch with her. She would guide them, similar to the people you're talking about right here, right now, some of whom you don't have to be Catholic or any specific religion to have her show up. I've had so many people tell me stories that all of a sudden they connected with her. She just comes into their awareness. And so can I say a little more?
Oh, yes.
And I firmly believe spiritual equality is the final frontier for women. We have pushed so hard for economic, financial, to be able to do everything that, not to be limited by someone saying, oh, women can't do that. And Mary Magdalene represents spiritual equality. I think we are entering into a new age, and this is the age of true partnership. We had matriarchy, which was more, feminine in charge, with patriarchy, masculine in charge. And I think this age, as tumultuous as it is part of the chaos is we are letting go of a way of, of a hierarchy that isn't working for us. And we are moving more into this connection with one another that is very heart-centered, very open. And I believe she is helping us usher in this age.
When you said that you had seen her reemergence, or you use the word resurrection, which I imagine you use very purposefully. What other times in the past did you see her show up?
So in the 1200s, there was this time where in Catholicism, in the Catholic Church, women were starting to become more powerful. And I don't know if you've heard of a saint called Hildegard of Bingen. That was her time where women were becoming an abbess of the church. And that means that they were leading spirituality. They were even preaching in the church, which, as you probably know now, in the Catholic Church, there's only men that preside over, the rituals. And the women were even teaching the new priests, and they really were coming into their own. And Mary Magdalene was really highlighted during that time. So many women and these, saints were in touch with her. And then there was a pope, and his name of all names was Pope Innocent. And he pushed that down. He shut off the abbesses. And he said, this is about priests. This is about men. You can no longer preach. And he shut it all down again. So women have risen and fallen. And I look to Catholicism in particular as a religion that is, it has been so involved in history that it is a good litmus test to see how this stuff is going on. So that was definitely a time. And then in the 1600s, you had Francis, St. Francis, who was all about nature and the earth and connecting with all the creatures, kind of this oneness. He also was a devotee of Mary Magdalene, and people would do pilgrimages to these little areas in France where I went to visit as well. And they would feel connection with her. And then in 2003, Dan Brown wrote the groundbreaking at that time, Da Vinci Code. And that was before I started writing, and she touched me before that came out. And I'm like, and I couldn't find at that time a lot of information. I had to do more research to uncover things. And then all of a sudden, the Da Vinci Code exploded. And it's really based on this mythology of this little town in France called Rennes-le-Château, this little area. The mythology came from that. Dan Brown did not make up the story. This story was part of the history of her story. And I thought, oh my gosh, something is moving here, and then the more I delve into it, like you said, again, the more people that come forward and say, wow, I've been touched by her too. I don't know what this is, but she's appearing, and we have this idea. So I'm going to be a little radical right now. There's in religious history, biblical history, there's this whole idea of the second coming, and all of a sudden Jesus is going to come back down on the earth and, come again. I believe it's Mary Magdalene. I think we are shifting, and it just touches my heart. Even as I say it, it brings a tear to my eyes. It's not the masculine. It's her taking her rightful place, I believe, as, in partnership. And I think that's what's helping to usher in this new age. And that's what's emerging right now.
So you spoke about Dan Brown's book. Did he get it right? Was there things that in your research that contradicted his kind of telling of that? Or was he mostly on the mark?
According to the mythology of this little town, he really told that story. I personally believe that there's a mystery to this that we will never totally know. I think the thing about Mary Magdalene and the sacred feminine is that it is about a personal experience. And I think she shows up in different ways for different people. So, there's this mythology that she and Jesus had a child together, and this child was a woman, and there's this whole divine lineage, which came out in Dan Brown's book. Possible. I'm not married to any particular story as far as that. There is evidence, or there are stories and mythologies that point to that. There was this time when Pope Innocent, again, shoved down the women's influence, where he also massacred this group of very heart-centered people called the Cathars. And a lot of them were burned, and at least 20,000 people. And they were the ones who really worshipped or got in touch with the sacred feminine and with spirituality being something that we came into direct connection. We didn't need a hierarchy to connect. And I think that went against this really big mega church where, if you boil down the beautiful teachings of all religions, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, it's really about connection and love. And when you impose an institution over it, people become greedy and it becomes politicized. And I think that's what happened. So we had these two factions, one of we need these people to be part of the church so that the church grows and we make money, and it became more political. And anyone who is considered a heretic, that is, with thinkings and teachings outside of what we have determined are the dictates, we're in competition with, and a lot of destruction went on, and a lot of really horrible things happened.
Yeah. I love that you talk about this idea of coming into partnership, because I often hear people talk, especially in the kind of new age community, about, the rising of the divine feminine. and sort of ushering in a new matriarchal hierarchy, right? And I love what you're saying about, Mary Magdalene taking her proper place. And it's more about the partnership. It's about the union. It's about coming together and, in your words, the spiritual equality. And I really appreciate that, because that to me makes more sense. Because just if we take one system and replace it with another system that has the same, mapping, then that really doesn't get us to where I hope humanity is headed. So what do you have further thoughts on that?
Me too. I 100% agree. It's not about power over, it's about partnership with. And it's not just partnership, men and women, and they get married and live happily ever after. We've got to be careful of that narrative. It's partnership with, women and women. It's partnership in work. It's partnership in leadership. I'm getting chills as I'm talking about this. It's, gone are the days of the guru of, okay, we have to worship this. It's about Mary Magdalene, to me, represents sisterhood. And I think for women, we need a strong spiritual sister too, and I think, again, it's partnering with somebody. You and I right here are creating partnership. And as we talk about things, both of our brains and hearts are connecting, and it sparks new ideas. I think this idea of partnership opens something up. It opens up creativity in a way that's way different than, someone's the boss and people are underneath that. It's changing leadership as well. We're all in this together. No matter where we are on our journey, we have had heartache, we have had woundedness, and we have had great joy. And each of us goes through periods where we're the ones that need a little bit of guidance and mentoring, and when we're the ones that can mentor someone else. And I think that's so critical right now, that we really sit with that. I've had women that have been so staunch, that the groups and things I've listened to, that it's like, we want to remove men from their power. And I'm like, yeah, it's not about that. There are really good men out there too, that really are trying to figure this out with us. We don't have to be at war with. We need a new narrative. And I think it is emerging.
There's a couple of things that really resonated there. This idea of constantly being at war with everything, being everything is something that we have to fight against. Even the language we use when we talk about cancer, or the war on drugs, or the war on poverty, or the war on this virus. And, everything is about constant reinforcement of our separation. Constant reinforcement of the us versus them, of creating the other. And in some ways, Mary Magdalene she kind of epitomized the story of the other. If you were to follow the mythology that was laid out in Catholicism. And so that to me really resonates, because at some point we need to realize that we are in community. Like you said, everything is a relationship, everything is partnership. And it's really hard to have partnerships if you constantly are stuck in that us versus them.
Totally agree. It's like, when I work with people too, so often, some of the new age communities, and I love every community is trying their best to, open something up and be the best they can be. And, but the philosophy of fake it till you make it, or, what, that's coming up, ignore it and just be positive. Well, there's room for that. And when we listen to the messages inherent in the woundedness, inherent in COVID, inherent in, having an illness, having a relationship that breaks up, and we can sit in our sadness, not wallow in it and be a victim to it, but allow it to open up. And a lot of times it's having somebody witness that for us that helps with that. There's something that we can open into that heals on a much deeper level. If we just try to shove it down and I'm happy, and in the meantime, you've got all these things going on in your head. Nope, I'm going to ignore those. That doesn't work either. So I love what you're sharing. It's not the war on, it's not against that. It's saying part of being human is suffering, whether you like it or not. And I know that's more of a Buddhist principle. And how can we be with that and listen to the messages inherent in that that help transform us and move us to deeper levels, and then help us move into a place of deeper transformation and resonance within ourselves, which then translates to being able to be more open-hearted, or as Brene Brown says, wholehearted in how we approach the world. I think that's what this is about right now.
The other thing that I really appreciated you speaking on was this idea that the men are trying to evolve and to break out of any sort of molds that we had. Like, just as women hated to be put in a mold, and maybe this, the whole I'll just stay happy and look on the bright side of life, that is something that we, I think, fought for, to say that no, and my emotionality isn't negative, my intuition, my creativity, my wildness, that isn't, like, how do we embrace all the full feminine? But we also need to appreciate that the men are evolving as well, and they want to break out of the mold, and they want to be able to explore who they are. And I think that idea of, it's time for men to sit down and be quiet right now, the women are speaking, again, is just the same. It's, sorry for this expression, but the same shit, just a different pile.
Yeah.
Sorry. We need to be able to allow space and hold space for the evolution of all of us. And I think that I feel like Mary Magdalene is playing a big role in that for us right now.
Love that. And I 100% agree. I have this other work. My problem is there's so many things I'm interested in. It's like a typical woman, I'm diverse. And this other work that I'm working on, I'm calling the New Masculine Code. I think women have fought so hard to maintain or to achieve some level of equality, to be able to be whoever they are and not be put in a box. And then I think along the way, we have risen. And like you said, we're coming to this place where it's women, over men. And I think in the process now, men are going through a little bit of their own evolution as well. Who does a woman want me to be? How do I be with a strong woman? Am I supposed to be a shoulder? Am I supposed to be her warrior? Am I supposed to go shopping with her? Am I supposed to buy her presents? And it's like, how do I be with a woman who is coming into her own strength? And that's not about just rolling over and letting her be the one in charge. It's how do I stand in my masculine power too? How do I show up as the man that I am and that I want to be, which sometimes means saying, no, that doesn't work for me. And again, I believe that's about partnership too. It's about being curious on both sides. It's about, when you're with somebody that is, going through things or really wanting to and leaning into who they are becoming, to be curious, to ask questions, to let them know, oh, I don't understand that. I'm not sure I agree with that. Or help me understand more. That's about partnership. And that helps, as we have achieved and moved into more individuation and self-awareness, I think we also can, be partnering with men as they are on their journey in the same way. Patriarchy isn't men versus women necessarily. It's the idea of the hierarchy. But men men suffer through the idea of patriarchy too.
I'm so glad you said that, because patriarchy isn't about men. It's about a system of, like you said, of a hierarchy that we all participate in. Mm-hmm. That some consciously, some unconsciously, but we all participated in this structure as it is. And so, yes, you're right. It's not just men versus women. And again, right, because as soon as you have that framing, you're pitting, one against the other. And I don't think that's our path forward. I want to back up a little bit and talk about your pilgrimage, because this to me is just fantastic. I have a love affair with all of Europe, particularly France. And so tell us, where did this pilgrimage take you? What were some of the cool things that you uncovered and some of the moments that were really special for you?
Awesome. Well, I actually went twice. So the first time I went was as a celebration. I finished my doctoral program, and I wanted to go and visit these sites that I had that I'd fallen so in love with my research. And I found this group that, this woman wrote a book called The Sacred Prostitute, and it was, Mary Magdalene, was the topic of that. And I went with a group of, I don't know, there are probably a dozen women. And when I first got there, I went to Rome because I wanted to see Rome, growing up Catholic. And so I arrived there all by myself, and there was a journey in that too. And my first time to Europe, my first time flying that far. And I learned a lot about myself. So then, anyway, fast forward to then I met up with the group, and we went and we visited the sacred sites, which are in the south of France, which are in Provence. And there is this magnificent cave that I love. Mary Magdalene's stories. I think each of her stories we can relate to as women, including the story of her being a prostitute. I think there's something in that mythology for us too, even though it was a false narrative. So you climb up this huge hill and mountain, and you go walk on this pilgrimage that many people have done over the centuries before you. And you walk into this cave, and it's like I could feel, something was very sacred there. And they have, water dripping down. I mean, it's really a cave, and they have an altar set up, and they actually do mass in the cave. And so then you have this altar over here, and then there's this hidden Mary Magdalene behind the altar, beautiful sculptures of her. But then over in the corner where most people don't even look, there's this ancient altar that looks like it's been there for years. I mean, for, 1500, 1600 years, that looks like an original altar. And I think for me, it was about feeling the energy of the place. And I love sitting in sacred sites when no one's there. So, we go for a mass, but then I just like to sit there and close my eyes and just feel what I feel. And there's something special about this place. And part of it, I think, is the energy of all the pilgrims that have come before and brought their love of her into that space. Oh, it was just awesome. And then I went to this little church called St. Maximin, and it's in La Sainte Baume. And that was a church, and it's a big basilica dedicated to her too. And way down in the basement, there is this gilded cage behind which they have this made out of gold kind of sculpture, which is supposed to contain her skull. And there's all kinds of stories about her bones and how one church stole the bones from another church, because in Catholicism, we also have this thing about the power of possessing a saint's relics. I remember learning that when I was just a little kid, and whichever church had the relics, they had those special blessings. There's something in the bones. And I think there's something about those stories that are just, I don't know. I love the mystery of those stories. So anyway, this was supposed to be her skull. And then I went to Italy and looked at her life, a lot of her images, which I love. I love art. Mary Magdalene was carried through the images of the artist throughout time. There were times where women wanted to be painted like Mary Magdalene, because when I grew up Catholic, we did have some feminine sacred, never equaled the masculine, but, we had Mary, the mother of Jesus. And, so there was an introduction of feminine, which actually came in because the women who held the spirituality, I believe, held the light for there to be some feminine. And a lot of the women prayed to her, and she became kind of the archetype of the sacred feminine, even though she wasn't given that same status. So Mary, the mother, was always depicted, I even have a little statue of her here. She always had, her hair was covered, she was just this very, beautiful yet humble woman. Mary Magdalene, hair flowing, sometimes you saw a breast exposed. She just walked in the world in her power. And as women went through life, the artists depicted her time and time again as this beautiful, sensual, connected person. She always had, her, I have another image of her too, her alabaster jar, which contained anointing oil. So I just experienced her and the beauty of her everywhere I went. Love seeing the actual images that I've seen before, when I went to Italy, to see the actual paintings of her. So fast forward to 2017, 13 years after I wrote my dissertation, and I thought, I am going to do this pilgrimage on my own. So booked Airbnbs, totally did this whole pilgrimage, went to France, to Paris first, and then took a train and rented a car and drove to all these sacred sites again. And what I loved about that is I could spend as much time as I wanted. And I was determined to go on her feast day, which is July 22nd. So July 22nd, every year in France, they take the skull out of the basement and they parade it around, and they have this big feast. And while it, in some ways it sounds a little morbid, in other ways, it's such a great celebration of her essence. So I think the skull represents the essence. And it was another one of those very delightful experiences where I went on my own, a little bit scared, but got in touch with that. And I'm determined to take a group of women to France, hopefully in the next couple of years. So anyway, that was a really long story. Is there anything that stands out for you, or any questions that come up?
Well, interesting. You talk about archetypes and the prostitute and maybe the wild woman archetype. Was there any other archetypes that she embodied?
I think she embodies the archetype of sisterhood. Okay, because Mary Magdalene partners with us. I think Mary Magdalene is a sister that I think, which is so important as, we are healing as women, to have that sisterhood. There's, the idea that she had a child, she can be the archetype of motherhood too. In the Catholic Church, she is the patron saint of women, the patron saint of prostitutes, and the patron saint of perfumers, because she has the story of anointing Jesus. And some people say that Mary, was a different Mary than Mary Magdalene. I don't believe it. I believe that was the same Mary that we have gotten in touch with.
How do we get from where we are now? This is a pretty big question, but how do we get from where we are now?
I'm game. Let's go for it, Angela.
To this, ushering in this new age of partnership. What can we do as individuals to be the catalysts in our community for that?
Mm-hmm. So I think the first thing is to get in touch with what you want, what you need, the things that light you up. So if there's something that you're curious about, that is touching your heart, that you're longing for or passionate about, lean into it. Find spaces that you can lean into it, because I believe as we do our individual work, that is part of this. And then I also believe that particularly for women, I see this as we have a hand up to the people who are kind of ahead of us, who can be mentors to us, because having mentors is important. And then we have a hand out here to the people who are coming into their own, who we can mentor. So I think that's a piece of it. And I think another piece is to begin having what I call courageous conversations. Let's talk about this. As you're connecting with somebody who, is a friend, start talking about, what are you seeing right now that you're curious about? Or where are you seeing people start to come into more partnership? And I think having conversations with our guys about this, and talking to them about their struggles, and how is it for you when you are with a strong woman? Or what do you need from me? And then just, I think engaging in dialogue is a huge piece. So again, I think there's two. One is live into our passions. There is no time for us to be silent any longer. The world's in kind of an effed up place right now. And I think part of it is because we're in a chaotic transition. The stronghold of the masculine patriarchal hierarchy does not want to let go. And we see that as evidenced by, big men playing war games with one another. Okay. And I think being in a place, as you said earlier, about where we look at ways that we can connect, even if we believe differently, and not that I'm at war with, but how can I open up to hearing what you have to say and not blaming or not, kind of hitting that wall of division where it's me against you. I think, as Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. If we believe this is happening, ask yourselves questions. How can I be in stronger partnership with somebody where I open my heart to the mystery and the curiosity of what's available for us? Let's see where we can take this. How does that sound to you?
That sounds great. You've used the word curious and curiosity quite a few times today, and I love that because I think, especially in the day of social media, where people are having to continually double down on their positions. And that's one of the things I think is really interesting about social media, is that never before have we had so many conversations where we continually have to reassert our position,
Yes.
being in that kind of combative me against you kind of mindset. It just lends itself to being more drawing the line in the sand over and over again. And what that does is, for the individual, at least in my perspective, is it doesn't give us the opportunity for reflection. It doesn't give us the space for growing and, self-development, because we're constantly having to kind of stay in the same spot over and over and over again. And so that idea of opening up and having courageous conversations, it seems like, wow, we've really moved far away from that. And that's going to take some concerted effort on all of our parts to start making our way back into being able to have those conversations. Because when I grew up, I loved having conversations with people who didn't agree with me. I thought that was really interesting and fun and exploratory and curious, like you were saying. And now it's almost, we've gotten more tribalistic. And I think that, moving, it seems like we couldn't be farther away from the age of partnership. And yet we're also sort of at the tipping point of moving into that. So
Love what you say about that. And I agree. It's like, Malcolm Gladwell's book, Tipping Point. It's like, all of a sudden there is enough there that it moves you to the other side of it. And in the process, it just feels almost like it's impossible. They have this story of this woman, or I don't know if it was a woman, but, swimming the English Channel and just giving up right before, because it was foggy and I can't go any further. And then just around the corner was actually the other side. We can't give up. We see so much unrest. And I think we need to be cognizant on a moment by moment basis of how we show up. How many times do I, have a little bit of, againstness that comes in my consciousness? Oh, this person is so, for me, it's people that are really dogmatic and think they're the only ones that are right and they're against everyone else. I have trouble because I am against them. And it's like, okay, wait a minute. How can I practice what I preach? I am saying that I am open. So maybe there is a through line. And I actually did a talk with people who were, let's just say, the opposite type of thinkers in their perspective than I. And I tried to talk about Black Lives Matter, and it so much unrest came up in my, naivete of talking about, slavery in the past and how we got to where we are. And there was such an against this, there was such a judgment against the movement. And what I found when I could sit with it, as people were coming at me with, you could feel the opposition. And I said, okay, you're here for a reason, breathe into this. We got into a deeper conversation. And what I found underneath that was fear. there was a tremendous amount of fear that all of this unrest, which was last year, was going to take their business, going to take their livelihood, was going to hurt their kids, that these people were against them and everything that they had built, this particular group. And I'm like, wow, okay. It's fear that is driving this. And I have to be present with that and be able to speak to that as opposed to being against it and judging it. So each of us has opportunities that will show up when we notice that we're making someone else wrong. Stop for a minute. And I love what Rilke says about living in the questions. We're so looking to find an answer, kind of being in that question of that and being willing to ask a question. Oh, okay, I hear that, tell me more, or what's going on underneath it. Not easy. They could see that my objective was really open-hearted. And I could see that a lot of why they were coming at me at this so strong was based on fear. So I think that was a little bit of movement that occurred.
Okay, so, we got a few minutes left here, and I want to talk about ways that we can maybe incorporate or connect with Mary Magdalene through ritual. And I know that you have an offer for my listeners. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I have, been so privileged to work with several women's groups and lead some. I have this great presentation I do on Mary Magdalene. And in the process, I have created this ritual on an anointing and a blessing, because Mary Magdalene also archetypally holds the power of being the anointer. She takes sacred oils and she anoints Jesus, and it's such a beautiful ritual. So what I have done is I've created this ritual for women to be able to anoint each other. And I would love to offer, your listeners this ritual that I have created and walk them through it. And what they will have to do is get some kind of sacred oils. I have my little sacred oils here that they use. It can be lavender. I have a great friend that has a lavender farm and creates sacred oils. So it doesn't really matter what it is, but it's the process of going through that ritual, seeing the woman and holding the space for the woman that sits in front of you and going through and blessing her. It's a very beautiful process, and it kind of brings up, some really beautiful emotion and connection. And then they switch roles and the other woman anoints the woman. And I've done it with women. I haven't done it with men yet, but at this point in time, I've done it with a lot of women's groups, and it allows us to sit in a deeper version of ourselves. It just we take away all the stuff in our brains and just kind of grounds us in a really beautiful way.
Ooh, I can just feel the energy, just being bathed in energy right now. That was very beautiful. So you have quite a few websites. So this is the part where I always let my guests share how people can connect with you and social media, anything that you'd like to leave them with today.
Okay. Well, I have Living and Loving Courageously as my website. I have an Instagram site too, which I can give you the link to, which I'm just starting to get into Instagram. It's been really challenging for me to learn how to use it, so I've had help. I have a website called A Calling of the Heart, which is my website on Mary Magdalene that I'm still in the process of. But, if someone just wants to send me an email, they can go on my website and send me an email. I'd love to connect with anyone who has an interest of her. And I will give you a link to the anointing and the blessing. And if they want to connect with me through that, that would be great. I really would love to keep the conversation going.
Yes. Well, I'd love to have you on again. I think we have many more wonderful things to talk about. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Chaos and Light podcast today.
Well, and Angela, this has been such a delight. I have so enjoyed connecting with you. What's really beautiful is when you meet somebody and it feels like you're kindred spirits. And the conversation that we have, we kind of spark ideas with one another. That's also what partnership is about. So thank you for not only engaging in this interview, but for partnering with me to encourage people to deepen their connection with themselves and each other. Loved it.
Oh, fantastic. I feel the same way. Well, we will be right back after this ridiculously short break. Are you enjoying this podcast and want to help this lady out? Well, share it with friends, or even better, leave a review on iTunes. We'd love to hear from you. Now back to the show. Well, that's it for today's episode of the Chaos and Light podcast. I highly suggest that you go to Jeanne's website and download the anointing and blessing ritual. It is beautiful and I highly recommend it. So links to that can be found in the show notes. Coming up next week, it's going to be a solo podcast. I have some things I'd like to share about what's going on in the collective. Well, that's it. I guess take care and seek the mystery.